Hello, friends, and welcome to our Good Friday service. We're so glad that you've taken time to be with us during this worship experience, and we look forward to sharing Easter Sunday with you as well. As I named yesterday, our deepest gratitude to you and for you as you continue to support Trinity in our mission and ministry through your texts, your phone calls, your emails, your contributions of tithes and offerings, all of the different ways that we are able to stay connected and do God's work in this community and throughout the world. Our deepest thanks to you. Please know we miss you. We are praying for you, and we love you. We look forward to the time when we can all be together again. In our Good Friday service at this time, we will continue with our hymns and our dramatic readings from Walt Wangren's The Book of God. In this service, we'll hear from Benson, who will be reading the exchange with Ciaphas, Pilate, and Jesus. We'll also hear from Josephson reading the whipping of Jesus. We'll hear from Keith Hochgraber as he moves us through Christ's death. And Brian Smith will be reading the Centurion's reflection at the tomb. Our thanks to April Spaeth for playing the piano. Our thanks to Peter Jacobson for providing vocals on our hymns. And our thanks to Bill Simmons for providing tech support. So as we begin this service, we recognize that we are gathered in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Would you please prepare yourself for worship as I offer our Good Friday lament. Sisters and brothers in Christ, on this most holy day when our Savior Jesus Christ passed from death to life, we gather at the entire church as the church throughout the world remembers Jesus' great love for us. This is a time of remembering. We remember Jesus' suffering, his great anguish as he anticipated the torture he would endure. We remember Jesus was taunted, made fun of, humiliated, so deeply misunderstood. We remember Jesus' slow and painful death as he was crucified. We remember God sent his Son to die for us in our place so that we would live. We remember. We remember.
Friday's dawning was uncertain. It was the end of the latter rains. Clouds had crept in from the sea and covered Jerusalem in a sky as undefined as the sea itself, a gray weight under heaven. Dawn, then, was a lessening of shadow, an odor of moisture, and a dirty light. Now and again, a thin, drizzling rain fell. The palace which Herod the Great had built more than 50 years ago was enclosed by a wall of massive stone, 45 feet high. Within the walls were rich green gardens, covered promenades bordered by canals, lovely pools, curious water fountains. The palace had more than 100 apartments, 2 magnificent banquet halls, roofs constructed of long beams carved with brilliant decorations, barracks for several legions of soldiers, stables. But 33 years ago, King Herod had gone down to death, and now, all his ambition for the glory of his name and the kingship of his son having failed, the place was named for the Roman governor who held court here during the high feast days of the Jews. It was called the Praetorium. Pontius Pilate walked its promenades. His troops occupied its barracks. Rome ruled. A principal gate in the Praetorium wall opened eastward to the wide public square of the upper city. Guards stood in towers on either side of the gate, though in these days they did not shut its huge doors. Jews who intended to celebrate the Passover would never defile themselves by entering the residence of a Gentile. But Roman law required prosecutions and sentencing to take place in public. In order to render legal judgments then, Pilate met with the people of Judea on that square east of the royal palace. A tribunal, an elevated speaker's platform, had been erected in that place. When court was in session, a large wooden chair was brought out and set upon the platform, the magistrate's seat. When Pontius Pilate sat therein, he was Rome. In the dirty dawn of Friday, High Priest Ciaphas stood at the very edge of the ramp that led to the Praetorium Gate and rapped the hard end of his staff on the flagstones. An audience and a judgment, he called. Behind him, a miserable group had gathered in the public square. Soldiers of the temple guard, certain leading members of the Sanhedrin, and in their midst, his wrists bound in front of him, his face soiled and tired, but otherwise unremarkable, Jesus of Nazareth. Pontius Pilate, procurator, the high priest called, clearly but loudly, not obsequiously. Here's a criminal of such public threat that Rome must bear the indictment and pass sentence and execute her sentence now, today, before sunset and the Sabbath. Having made his formal petition, the high priest returned to those who stood under the gray drizzle in the open square. Other members of the Sanhedrin showed more anxiety than he did, murmuring amongst themselves about the charges they would bring. Jesus allowed his eye to wander over the spacious pavement. He focused on the far southeastern corner. His lips tightened and his jaw clenched. Several women and a man were lurking in that corner, their hoods drawn up against the weather. Their faces were mostly concealed, but he recognized them. Andrew, his first follower. He must have brought the women here. Mary Magdalene, pinched and pale, Joanna and Susanna and Mary of Bethany, and her sister, Martha, short and solid. Jesus closed his eyes with unutterable sadness. Suddenly, 2 Roman soldiers thrust a wooden shaft between his elbows and his back. They each took an end and drove him forward to the front steps of the platform. Pilate's chair was in position. Pontius Pilate himself was ascending steps at the back of the platform. The judge and the accused arrived at the same time. A servant raised a shield over Pilate's chair to protect him from the rain. "Now then," said Pilate, sitting down and beckoning the high priest forward, "what's the charge?" The Roman wore his hair cut short. His knuckles were dimpled, his fingers fat, his upper lip low in the middle and high at the sides, as if it were deformed by too much blowing of trumpets. It gave him an expression of perpetual sneering. Caiaphas said, "We found this man, Jesus of Nazareth, perverting our nation." "Yes," said Pilate, and said Caiaphas, "sedition. He says that he is Messiah, a king." Pilate frowned. "Why have you come to me?" he said. "Your Messiah is your religion. Judge him according to your own law." The governor made motions to stand and go. Caiaphas snapped to attention. "No, we must come to you," he said. "We do not have the authority to put a man to death." Pilate did stand up then. "Death?" he said. "You think he's committed a capital offense?" He stepped forward and squinted into Jesus' face and then said, "Bring him in. I'll interrogate him inside." By the rod at his back, the soldiers dragged Jesus after the governor through the gate into the praetorium itself. In a broad hallway, Pilate again sat down. Jesus was positioned directly in front of him. There was a bowl of fruit at Pilate's left hand. "I have no time for this," he said. "Make your answer short, Jesus of Nazareth. Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus, bent forward by the rod through the crooks of his elbows, nevertheless raised his head and looked into Pilate's eyes. "Do you say this on your own," he said, "or did others tell you this about me?" "What? Am I a Jew?" Pilate sneered. "Your own chief priest delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my subjects would be fighting for me. but my kingdom does not belong here at all." "So," said Pilate, "then you are a king?" "You say I am a king," said Jesus. "The reason I was born into the world is to testify to the truth. All those who belong to the truth listen to my voice." "Truth?" said Pilate abruptly, half out of his chair. "What is truth?" Shaking his head, he walked out into the wet morning while the accused was driven, stumbling behind him. This time Jesus was forced to climb the steps to the tribunal. As he came to the top, he saw Pilate's back and heard his confident announcement, "I have no fault in this man." Immediately, a clamor arose in the public square. Crowds were gathering now. Certain members of the Sanhedrin came forward, lodging further charges against Jesus. "He stirs the people to insurrection, even from Galilee to this place." Pilate glanced towards Jesus. Permission to respond. Jesus said nothing. "He's a known revolutionary." Pilate nodded, but Jesus said nothing. "He has forbidden his followers to give tribute to Caesar." Each time an accusation was presented, Pilate invited some reply from Jesus, but he held his peace. He pursed his lips, he looked every accuser squarely in the face, but he himself said nothing. Finally, Pilate raised his hands for silence. He stepped forward on the platform, prepared to render his ruling. "I examined this man and found no evidence of any of your charges," he said, "but your outrage is real and it must be satisfied. Therefore, I will order the accused to be scourged with a whip of knotted cords and weights of metal, the flagellum. After that, I propose to honor your custom of releasing one prisoner at the Passover. I will release this man, Jesus of Nazareth." There was a moment of perfect stillness. The high priest looked trapped, unable to respond. Suddenly, a voice cried from the back of the crowd, "Jesus? Jesus who?" It was a woman, perhaps 50 years old. She began to push her way forward, crying, "Jesus of Nazareth? Not Jesus of Nazareth!" She was clothed modestly like a rabbi's wife, though her robes were drenched and her progress was broken by the weight. Jesus watched her coming. So did Pontius Pilate and Ciaphas, the head priest. The woman's features were hectic with fear and a wild hoping. "No," she was calling, "not Jesus of Nazareth, but Jesus Barabbas, my son, set my son free." Jesus recognized the rage of maternal love in this woman, and he admired her. Caiaphas seemed to catch fire as she came nearer. He reached for her, took her elbow, escorted her to the very lip of the platform, and, trembling with compassion, cried to Pilate, "Yes, this woman's son. If you choose to honor the custom, sir, release unto us Jesus Barabbas." A handful of zealots clapped their hands and yelled, "Barabbas! Barabbas!" The governor was stunned. "The man is a murderer," he said. "You yourself asked for his arrest, and I agreed." Caiaphas said, "You know which is more dangerous to both of us." Pilate snapped, "Only one of them has killed a Roman." But Caiaphas and the high priests were already encouraging the crowds, common folk of common loyalties, who drowned Pilate's words with their chanting, "Barabbas, son of father, release unto us Barabbas." This grew to a thunder in the square. People came rushing from everywhere in the city. More and more voices took up the chanting. The crowd was swelling into a mob. "Barabbas! Barabbas!" Only those on the tribunal could hear the governor issue orders to a centurion. "Take him to the barracks, whip him, and make it bloody, man." 4 soldiers grabbed Jesus and dragged him back through the praetorium gate. There was no care in their going, haste, brutality. The multitude was achieving that swollen, rocking rhythm with which every Roman feared, because riot was at the heart of it. Make it bloody, man. In the barracks, Soldiers stripped the clothes from Jesus' body. His hands were tied to a post with thongs. Out of nowhere, a lash whistled, stung his shoulders with little pinchings, then ripped backward and set his flesh on fire. Again, the whistle and the lash and the nettle stings. Again, an audible tearing of his skin. Then he heard someone cry out in sympathy.
Whistle, and Jesus couldn't help it. He flinched. The whistle. He drew one knee up to his stomach. The whistle. And Jesus realized who was crying out. The whistle. It was himself. The whistle. The whistle. Jesus began to taste blood in his breathing, in his mouth and nose. He stopped making noises. Darkness closed around the edges of his thought. The whistle. He sagged. He hung heavy from his wrists. The whistle. As though from far away, Jesus watched several soldiers place on the man's brow a circlet of thorny briars. Next, they threw over his back a billowing purple robe as huge as the sky. Hail, King of the Jews! Ha ha! Hail, robed in blood, thou bloody king! But then Jesus himself was on his feet, walking. Under rough fibers, his skin was sticky and wet. A thick liquid was running down his legs. The soles of his feet kept slipping in it. His back was unbendable. Jesus knew that it would hurt soon. This was the Father's will. Then he was standing on one side of the tribunal, confronting the multitude. Pontius Pilate was gesturing toward him and shouting, "Behold the man!" On the other side of the tribunal now stood another man, athletic, dark-eyed, fiery, and very clean. How neatly combed he was. Jesus strove to stand erect, but failed. His robe was woven of iron and stone. Pilate shouted now, "What do you say? Which man should I release to you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus of Nazareth?" The multitude had found a single voice. "Barabbas!" it bellowed. Pilate looked troubled. "Then what shall I do with this man?" he cried. "Crucify him!" came the thick-throated chorus. Priests and people and zealots and pilgrims, but no distinction among them now. They were the mindless mob. "Crucify him!" Jesus lifted his eyes and looked to the southeast corner of the square, where he had seen some of his followers in the dirty dawning. Suddenly he gasped and nearly collapsed. "Why should I crucify him?" Pilate was crying. "What evil has he done?" Ciaphas leaped to the platform and shouted at the top of his lungs, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God." Jesus had spied his mother. She was clinging to John, woman of no means, woman who had borne him, woman whose clothing was dark with the morning rain. She was staring at him with horror, her mouth wide open. "The will of the Father, the will of the Father." Pilate was shouting at Jesus, "What's the matter with you, man? Have you nothing to say?" Ciaphas, too, was shouting, "Crucify him, magistrate, or else you are no friend of Caesar's, because he pretends to be a king like Caesar. Crucify him!" The huge crush of the people was wheeling toward riot. "Crucify him!" "What then?" shrieked Pontius Pilate. "Shall I crucify your king?" The high priest turned purple with fury. "We have no king but Caesar." And the voice of the multitude resolved itself in an endless, ponderous, roaring, "Crucify!" So Pilate sank down into the judgment chair and gripped the armrests and delivered his verdict. He released the man that had been arrested for insurrection and for murder. But Jesus of Nazareth he turned over to the will of the people. He ordered a centurion and a small contingent of soldiers to lead him outside the city and to crucify him. Jesus is dragging a heavy wooden beam up the center of the street. In fact, 2 soldiers tried to lay it on his shoulders, but the weight of the rough wood startled the lacerations in his back, and the pain became so intense that something like light exploded in Jesus' skull, and he slipped to the ground in a faint. So now he is cradling one end of the beam under his left arm and bumping its other end over the stones of the street. Each stone is a Sinai. There are spike holes near the extremities of the beam. It has been used before. Jesus is moving north, slowly, toward the garden gate. He is wearing his own robe again, and his tunic, though they have lost their shape, scabrous, befouled by human discharge. His hair, because he bends so far forward, hangs nearly to the ground. The sandaled feet of a centurion are walking in front of him, just within his vision. He is following these feet. There is the sound of wailing behind him. He has heard such lamentation before, sometimes genuine, sometimes conventional, for Lazarus, for Jairus' daughter, for the son of the widow in Nain. The beam sticks between 2 stones. Jesus groans and drops to his knees, and the lumber hits ground. He doesn't blame the crossbeam, the patibulium, to which he will be nailed. He just can't carry it anymore. Motion makes his skin scream, and beneath all his bones are weak and tired. Someone is parting his hair and drawing it back from his forehead. He is able to see. An elderly woman, her eyes swimming in tears, wipes his brow with a rich linen cloth, then presses it to his head. And the centurion seems kindly enough, middle-aged, gruff. He has spoken to the soldiers. Gauls by the look of them, who even now are placing the wooden beam on the back of another man. Jesus is overcome with gratitude. His chest heaves with weeping. He rises and finds his body very light. He walks forward. Immediately the procession lifts its voice again in the lamentation. Jesus turns, shaking his head. "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me," he says. "Weep for yourselves. The days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the wombs that never bore and the breasts that never gave suck.' In those days, people will beg the mountains to fall on them and the hills to hide them." Jesus hands the linen cloth back to the woman who had wiped his face with it. "For if they do these things when the tree is green," he whispers, "what will happen when it is dry?" The cloth is bloody. He is sorry for that, but he turns and walks. The morning drizzle has turned to rain. Everyone is wet, and the sky is more than merely gray now. Darker clouds are rolling in from the west. There is a breeze. It's 9:00 in the morning. Friday. Out through the garden gate they go, and yet further north. The stone city wall runs north and south on his right-hand side. Jewish tombs are cut into the rock on his left. Here is a hillock by the side of the road, a rocky mound in which 4 stout poles are fixed, forever ready to receive the crossbeams and the bodies of criminals sentenced to crucifixion. The hill allows a public viewing. It is called Golgotha. The centurion halts here and hands Jesus a jar of liquid. He lifts it to his lips and tastes it, but then refuses to drink. This is wine mixed with myrrh, a narcotic. It is not in the will of the Father. 4 soldiers strip Jesus down to his loincloth. At the same time, another group of soldiers arrives. They bring 2 more men with crossbeams on their backs. These men do drink. They drain their jars completely dry. All 3 now are stretched on the ground, each beside a different pole. Jesus stares at the black clouds lowering. His back is a field of fire. He cannot swallow. He wishes he could swallow, but his tongue is thick and stuck to the roof of his mouth. Someone lifts his head by the hair, then pillows it on the wood. His arms are yanked left and right as far as they will go, palms up. A cold point touches his wrist. Jesus hears the thump of a maul on metal. Once, twice, he feels a spike probing the bones in his right arm. Once, twice, 3 times. As the bones separate and the spike bites hard wood, a dull pain pulses up into his armpit and his neck. This is the will of the Father. His left arm, likewise, is nailed to the crossbeam. Then, by pikes and human strength, Jesus is lifted bodily from the ground. Soldiers climb ladders behind the stout pole, hauling him up and allowing him to swing from his arms alone until the patibulum is lashed to the pole and the cross is formed. The soldiers descend. In front of him, they bend his knees and drive a 3rd spike through his ankles. His muscles convulse. He begins to tremble as if he were very cold. His teeth chatter. He bites his tongue, but doesn't notice, except that there is the taste of blood in his mouth. Father, Jesus speaks through bloody foam and through shivering, even while one of the Roman soldiers climbs the pole behind him. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That soldier hangs a shingle at the very top of the cross. Printed on it, in Hebrew and Greek and Latin, by order of Pilate himself, is the legend, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews.
Beneath the cross of Jesus, I long to take my stand. The shadow of a mighty rock within a weary land, a home within a wilderness, a rest upon the way, from the burning of the noontide heat and burdens of the day. Upon the cross of Jesus, my eye at times can see the very dying form of one who suffered there for me. And from my contrite heart with tears to wonders I confess the wonder of his glorious love and my unworthiness.
Now the troops responsible for these crucifixions settled on the ground and began to divide the criminals' clothes among themselves. They cast lots for the various pieces. Rain falls steadily now, the breeze is stiffening. Nevertheless, pilgrims still traveling up the road into the city. They see the inscription above him and they grin. Certain Pharisees are standing by, nudging one another. "Ha! He saved others," they laughed. "What do you think? Can he save himself?" Derision is common at crucifixions. It takes a man so long to die. Citizens participate, but Jesus' shoulders are pulling apart. He can scarcely hear the human voices over the shrieking of his own pain. "If you are the Son of God, prove it by setting yourself free. Hey, King, King of the Jews, jump down from the cross and we will believe in you." The criminal hanging to his left is laughing. "Messiah, Messiah." The man is gasping in genuine laughter. "Ha ha! Now I meet the Messiah. Been waiting all my life. Been waiting since the days of David. He. And look, he shows up dying. Well, Messiah," he hisses at Jesus, "save yourself and save me too." "How can you say that?" The other criminal is not laughing. "Do you not fear God? We are justly condemned, but this man has done nothing wrong." "Jesus," he whispers. Jesus, aroused by the devotion in the utterance, lifts his head and looks. The man's tendons are cracking through his neck and shoulders. "Jesus of Nazareth, you healed my mother of bleeding," the criminal whispers. "Doctors nearly destroyed her. I hated them. I hated everyone in authority. But you said that her faith saved her. Now I am touching you, Jesus, as she did. And I'm begging you to remember me when you come into your kingdom." The poor child, frightened of dying, casting his lot to the one crucified beside him, Jesus struggles for breath and answers, "Truly, today you will be with me in paradise." All at once the wind dies. Black clouds rise like fists in the heaven. Even the beasts are silent, and the travelers hurry towards the city now. A storm is coming. Jesus drops his eyes, seeing familiar women at his feet, and involuntarily cries out, "This is the sorrow, this is the suffering, greater than whips and spikes and a universe of derision." His mother is there, Mary, still supporting herself by gripping John's arm, and is looking directly at him, pleading with him. Her face is at the level of his waist. She is crying. She is 50 years old, gray and frail, and her eyes are begging him, "Why? Why are you dying?" Jesus wants to howl his grief at the black skies. He cannot touch his mother anymore. He cannot receive her love anymore. Oh God, in this condition, he is not worthy of the love of anyone. And this is the will of the Father? "Woman, woman, woman," he mutters to his mother. He rolls his head toward John. "He is your son now." To John, Jesus whispers, "And she is your mother. Please take her away, care for her." He shuts his eyes. He is occupied by the elemental things, life and death. His body hangs heavily from extended arms and the metal spikes at the end of them. Whenever he moves, his bones make grinding sounds, and the pain descends into his pelvis, and he loses control of all of his physical functions. He moans in human filth. Jesus opens his eyes again. His mother and John are gone. The day is dark with thick darkness. Thunder rumbles deep in the heaven. There is a pause of preternatural calm. Then lightning forks from the belly of the clouds. The crash follows immediately, and all at once the wind is shrieking down the Jewish tombs. Trees bow and rise again, the leaves torn from them like woman's hair. The road to Jerusalem clears swiftly of people. The soldiers huddle on the lee side of the hill. It is noon, and now, when the flashes of lightning themselves are extinguished, the earth is utterly black. Darkness an hour, while the fierce wind makes the rain sting like sand on the skin, and no one exists at all in the world but Jesus and his wretched body. If he should call out, who would hear? The wind pulls and snaps his hair like a banner. All his wounds have tongues. They are screaming in pitches higher than hearing. Darkness another hour. Darkness coiled and thick, itself a power entoiling him, binding his chest and his heart and his mind. Jesus can neither think nor breathe. He is sunk down in Teum, the great engulfing flood of the dead, the deep that boils beneath creation. He has been swallowed by chaos. This is the place. It is here he is dying. Darkness the third hour, and now he knows obliteration. Jesus has been blotted out of the book of life. Not even God is here. Eli? No, not even his Father, whose will he is now obeying, the Father who has loved him from the beginning, whom he has loved, whom he has called Abba. Eli? Eli? Where is his Father now? Has the sun become so fall that even God cannot look upon him? It is Jesus of Nazareth who howls out of Shiloh. None but him can he hear the words. They are his own words. He howls them to the heaven. My God, he shrieks, my God, why have you forsaken me? Silence. The universe is silenced by that cry. Jesus throws his body outward from the cross. His ribs spray apart in the straining. His shoulders form hollows at the pit of his neck. His mouth is an empty canyon. Someone says, Is he calling Elijah? I don't know, someone else. Wait and see. A third person is running through the darkness towards the crosses. Jesus allows his body to droop. The weight of it draws out his arms, closing the cage around his lungs, constricting his breathing. He can only breathe in faint pants, but he whispers, I am thirsty. Yes, yes, cries the person who's been running towards him. Yes, drink this. On a long straw, this most civil individual raises a sponge to Jesus' lips. He sucks and tastes a common wine. He drinks. Jesus has never drank anything so sweet in all of his life before. The rain has ended. The wind has died. A little light sifts down like flour from the clouds. It is finished, Jesus gasped. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. His body falls forward. His head sinks between the wings of his rising arms. His heavy black hair, his long wet hair, falls over his head like a curtain. An everlasting sigh issues from his open mouth. And that is the end. He dies.
O sacred head now wounded, with grief and shame weighed down, now scornfully surrounded, with thorns thine only crown. O sacred head, what glory, what bliss still now was thine. Yet though despised and gory, I joy to call thee mine. Lord, be my consolation, shield me when I must die. Remind me of thy passion when my last hour draws nigh. These eyes have faith receiving, from thee shall never move. For all who die believing, die safely in thy love.
The centurion, under whose watch 3 men were executed outside Jerusalem on the Friday of Passover week, retired soon afterward. His 20 years were up. He might have continued in the legions, of course, seeking promotions, but his spirit could no longer be committed to the military, nor to Rome for that matter. He felt, in fact, released from all the entangled demands of which his life had been lived. His name was Longinus. He told the story often, how the man on the middle cross died quickly, almost as if it were an act of volition, a choice he could make. Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. There had been a spring storm more terrible than any Longinus had remembered before. And then, as if the world was emerging from the darkness, Jesus asked for a drink. And he, Longinus, having anticipated the request, was already coming by with some thin wine in a sponge. He lifted the sponge to Jesus, who drank, and who then bestowed upon the Roman such a generous and completely personal smile of thanksgiving that Longinus caught his breath. So to be known, he thought to himself, how can this man possibly know me? But the man said something like, it's all over now. And he put his head down. and he died. Like choosing it. Like the last breath was no more difficult than the first had been. Like making a gift of the remarkable moment to the one who had given him drink. To Longinus, here, this is for you. Therefore Longinus had said, surely this was the Son of God. And though he said it spontaneously, he never took it back again. He believed it. Nor was he alone. Some women had watched this man's dying from the beginning. They had stayed through the storm, and the instant he died, they knew he was dead, and they drew near. They looked at his body with more than affection. They gazed at it with such deep and speechless yearning that they could not cry. Even in spite of the pain of the yearning, Longinus wished that something in his life might mean that much also to him. Later that day he saw again that expression of fathomless yearning, this time in the eyes of a man of some wealth and authority. About 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Pilate called Longinus into his presence and asked whether Jesus of the Nazareth were truly dead already. Yes, the centurion said. What? In less than half a day? Everyone else takes days to die. It's unusual, but I saw him die. He's dead. And I suppose you sought the evidence of it. Well, I wouldn't have, except that the Jews want all three taken down before the evening, their Sabbath. I know, Pilate said. There's a fella here who wants the body of Jesus the Nazarene, a member of the Sanhedrin, Joseph. He wants to bury him in his own tomb. You are sure then he's dead? My Lord, we went to break the legs of the criminals to hasten their dying. But Jesus was already dead. A soldier proved it by piercing his side with a spear. The blood that flowed out was mingled with water. Pontius Pilate waved a fat hand in front of his face. I will never understand these people. Never. Go tell that fella Joseph. He has my permission. He's waiting in the shadows of the gate. Go! It was in the eyes of Joseph of Arimathea that Longinus saw the yearning for the second time. Therefore, he attached himself to the Jew. They returned to Golgotha. Joseph, a man well-groomed and richly dressed, knelt down on the earth and unrolled a linen cloth. It was an expansive piece, close woven and white. Then he leaned a ladder against the back of Jesus' cross. He took a rope and an iron claw and climbed up behind the body, which still hung from its arms away from the pole. Joseph looped the rope around the chest of the dead, then pulling the ends back under his armpits and over the crossbeam, he tossed them down to Longinus. With sudden and violent wrenches of the claw, Joseph yanked the spike from Jesus' left wrist. The body swung out and hung from the right arm. Longinus tightened the rope, taking Jesus up somewhat. Joseph applied himself to the right spike. It whimpered in the wood, and Jesus slumped altogether forward into the loop of the rope. Longinus felt the weight in both ends of the rope. Hold him, sir, Joseph whispered. Hold him. He scurried down the ladder and stood below the slouching corpse under the face, and the black rain of the dead man's hair. He put the claw to the spike through Jesus' ankles. Longinus heard that he was weeping when he pulled that spike. Even as Joseph spread his arms to catch the corpse, he glanced to the centurion and whispered, "Now." And Longinus paid the rope out, and Jesus came down into Joseph's arms, one at the bend of the knees and one around his shoulders. The head fell over Joseph's left arm. The mouth opened up under Joseph's close gazing, and then again Longinus saw that holy yearning in his eyes. Joseph of Arimathea was holding his whole treasure in all the world, this world and the next one too. He lay his Lord down upon the white shroud. He wound the linen around him. And here came the women again. They knelt like flowers around Jesus' tender wrapping. They each touched the broad, bloodless forehead of the dead man before it too was covered in cloth. Then they watched as Joseph took the shoulders and Longinus took the feet, and together they bore the body to Joseph's tomb, carved in rock with others of the Jews. Joseph knelt down and backed in. Longinus knelt and went forward. They lifted the body to a low ledge cut in the stone on the right. They came out again and rolled a wheel-sized stone down a groove that had been etched just outside the sepulchre until the heavy stone covered the door. So then, it was done. Jesus of Nazareth was buried. Evening fell. The Sabbath